So I've been shooting with the Fuji XPRO 3 and I thought I'd share a few of my thoughts with you. Please bear in mind, these things are subjective and these are just my opinions, okay? So I'm a professional photographer based in the UK. I've been shooting Canon cameras most of my life, but I've shot in most of the other main systems out there. So the thing to remember with this camera is that it was designed, I think, quite specifically for around the street photography genre. So it's not going to be everything to everybody. Not everyone's going to like it. And there's a few quirks with this camera that I'll go on to talk about. And again, those are things that people might really like or might dislike, and that's up to the individual to make their choices. So to begin with, I really like cameras that feel bionically connected to me from the first moment that I pick them up, and this camera has that in bucket loads. Every setting is where I want it to be, every dial is where I want it to be. It just feels right for me, and it's rare that that happens to me. I don't think I've felt quite so connected to a camera in a long time, actually. It looks great as well. I really like the aesthetic. It looks very discreet, and for street photography that's really important. So when you pick it up, my hand went immediately to the on-off switch, which is up here near the shutter button, and then the shutter button falls exactly under your finger. Your left hand instantly goes to the aperture ring, which is on the lens, which is all very old school and cool. The shutter speed is up on the top with the automatic aperture control if you want it, and then you have the ISO dial on top of the shutter speed, which is really instinctive if you're used to, specifically if you're used to old school cameras. It reminds me very much of the Olympus OM1 that I used to use. The best thing for me is the exposure control dial, which is near the thumb at the back, which is where your thumb falls instantly. I like shooting in aperture priority mode, and it's great to have that control right there, and the weight of the dial is actually just about perfect for me. I've got quite big hands, and so some of the cameras, mirrorless cameras in particular, are a bit fiddly for me, but this one is about right. Really nice. It has dual card slots, which is really important for me. That's kind of hugely important when you shoot professionally, to have a backup, and I really like that they've done that. The big conversation piece with this camera is the electronic viewfinder, hybrid optical viewfinder thing that is on the side. Now most cameras have their viewfinders in the middle and that can kind of lose a bit of connection because you're hiding behind the camera when you're looking through it. This is nice because it's over on the side, and so if you're shooting street or documentary, it means you have a really good level of connection with what's going on around you and maybe with your subject, and I'm very fond of the viewfinder being in that position. Now the hybrid nature comes because the first time that you look through it, you will see an EVF, which is an electronic viewfinder, electronic version of the image, typical with most cameras these days, and that works fine. However, if you flip this switch, then you go over to the hybrid optical viewfinder, which is very much like a Leica rangefinder. So if you're liking shooting like that style, then you have that option, and in the corner you can press the button again and you get a little electronic focus aid, which is really cool. So if you wanted to use manual focus or zone focus, you can kind of hop between all of those different styles. I thought it wouldn't work to begin with. I thought it might be a bit quirky, but actually I found myself using it a surprising amount and really enjoyed it. And I think a lot of people that choose this camera will find themselves drawn to experimenting between the different viewfinder options and trying out different things with different circumstances, and then probably finding one that they like to stick to. And I think a lot of people will probably end up using the EVF mostly. I've been shooting with the 23mm f2 lens, equivalent to 35mm in old school money, which is a great street photography lens. And it's great, sharp, wide open at f2. It's nice and light and compact and small. And Fuji do a great range of lenses these days. I think most people that are shooting with a camera like this are going to use the smallish prime lenses or the standard lens, but it works with any of the lenses from the Fuji X lineup. The image quality of the camera is fine. If you can't get what you need out of this camera, then you're doing something significantly wrong. The files look great. And the ISO range is great too. Goes up really high. I shot some self-portraits with it the other day in really dark lighting, 12,800 ISO I believe. And the picture quality is fine. It's a bit grainy, but that's quite nice. And I think most people that shoot with this kind of camera won't mind that kind of filmic grainy look. So the next conversation piece with the camera, people will either like or dislike, and I dislike it, I'm afraid, is the screen. It doesn't have a typical screen in the back. It has this little square, and this little square shows you which film simulation preset you're using, which we'll get on into a minute. But it doesn't have the typical screen on the back. What it has is the ability to flip it out and put the screen into waist level finder mode, which is great for your street photography. And I love these kind of flip out screens like this because it means that you can discreetly take pictures, you can take pictures from low down, and you can take pictures from high up if you want to. Just like a Rolleiflex or a Hasselblad, works great, love it. But it won't go into normal kind of screen on the back of the camera like normal mode. And that is a huge pain. And I find it really frustrating because the reason they did it was actually really smart thinking. They did it so that photographers would become more pure in their photography, and I'm sure a lot of people will love it. They'll become more pure in their photography, they won't be chimping and looking at the pictures that have gone so much, and they'll be much more in the present and focused on the pictures that they're taking. And so they've actually sort of restricted photographers from looking at the screen by actually making it not quite so available. Also, it doesn't tilt out, by the way, so you can't do any selfies or anything like that easily. But for me though, it just doesn't work not having the screen available as standard on the back of the camera. I've just become too used to using it over the years, and I rely on it a lot. And I don't chimp a lot. I'm not somebody that walks around staring into the back of the camera. I tend to be quite in the present when I'm working, but I do like the ability to be able to glance down in between shots and just see that I've got what I thought I was going to get with the camera. Or make sure that I'm roughly in the right place with my settings. I know that you can do that through the EVF, but I quite like to do it while I'm talking to a subject or while I'm walking along, or, you know, I don't want to be kind of looking to preview my pictures through the EVF while I'm talking to somebody, for example. And so for me, it doesn't work. For others, it might. I'm not going to talk about video because that's not why I got hold of this camera in the first place, but it's got some pretty impressive specs, 4K up to 60 frames a second. One of the things I was interested to try out, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be for me or not, is the film simulation options that this camera offers. And what this is that the Fuji color scientists looked at some of the old film, they studied the aesthetic and the look of that film, and then recreated it and baked it into this camera so that you can apply it to your pictures as you take them. And you can choose between, I think, 10 different options. There's black and whites and colors and sort of high saturation and low saturation options, and they all relate back to some of the actual Fuji names of the film. And it's cool, you can flick between them as you shoot, so you can sort of 1 minute be shooting black and white and then you can move over to a colour film, and that's very nice, and I quite like the effects. The problem for me is that it works only in JPEG, and I really like shooting RAW. I really like shooting RAW and coming back with a file that represents all the very best quality that the camera can take, and then applying my own look to that picture in post-production afterwards, rather than having it done for me in camera. Now, I can see why people would love the film looks. I think it works really well, and actually better than I thought it might work on the camera, and the JPEGs look great. So I think it's, for anyone that's doing that, I think it's an impressive way of working, and it cuts down a lot of your post-production time. It's just not for me personally. Again, if I was shooting for fun, I probably would use that all of the time, but just when I'm working professionally, it's important to me that I have a RAW. You can shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time and apply those settings, the film simulation looking to the JPEG, which is probably the best of both worlds, but it also creates more files and more confusion if you shoot as much as I do, and it's just another thing to worry about. But I think for a lot of people, shooting both might be a really good option. The interesting thing with this camera is that it shoots at 11 frames per second on the motor drive if you want to. So if you're predominantly into street or documentary, but occasionally like to shoot a bit of sport, then you could whack a big long lens on the front of this and go and use the EVF, and you've actually got a very, very highly capable sports camera. And the same for landscape. If you like shooting landscape, you've got your lovely flip down screen that you could stick a nice wide angle lens on here and your filters and put it on a tripod, and you could go out and you have a very capable landscape photography camera. And I'm very grateful for your time for watching. I know that there's probably things that I've missed out of this review, and I'm sorry for that if you've been hoping for something else, but these are just my thoughts, and I won't be pursuing this camera, but I may be pursuing the XPRO 2, which I believe has a more static style of screen and similar image quality, so you never know. I'd love to hear your opinions. If you're shooting this camera or you're thinking about it, it'd be really nice to hear what your thoughts are as well. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.